Hi everyone, welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this episode we're going to learn how to play the 2 to 6 player game Keyflower by R&D Games and powered by GameSalute. The Keyflower is a ship that, along with its sister ships, will be bringing new workers into your community each round. And you will have to use these workers in order to collect and transport resources, bid on village tiles, and acquire new skills. The player who can do this the best will collect the most victory points and win the game. So join me at the table and let's learn how to play Keyflower. To start, each player collects a player screen. We'll be setting up for a 2-player game, so the rest can be returned to the box. These 6 tiles, labeled as homes, are randomly dealt. 1 to each player where it is placed in front of your screen. These represent the start of your personal village. Any leftover home tiles are then returned to the box. The player who received the lowest numbered home tile then collects the start player marker. Then put out the boat tiles, showing the black worker and the number of players in your game. So in this case, we'll remove all of those for 3 or more players. The boat tiles are double-sided, so make sure they start the game on the side with the black worker showing. These are the double-sided turn order tiles, and you can identify them because they all have this matching symbol on the bottom. Once again, you will only keep out those tiles that match the number of players in your game, and this is identified right here at the very top of the tile. So in this case, we'll keep out this tile, but the rest are returned to the box. The remaining hexagonal tiles are village tiles, which you divide and then shuffle into their own seasons, as indicated by the symbol in the top left-hand corner: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. The game begins in the spring season, so using the chart that you see on screen right now, which is also found in your rulebook, you will deal a certain number of these spring village tiles to the table, and this is based on the number of players. So we'll be dealing out 6. The rest you can just return to the box. They won't be used during this game. Each player also randomly receives 3 of the winter tiles, but these are shuffled and dealt face down, so none of the other players can see which tiles you're receiving. You, of course, can look at them yourself. The remaining winter tiles are also returned to the box. The autumn and summer tiles can be set aside. They'll get used later. Put out the green workers, as well as a pile for each of the resources of gold, wood, stone, and on this table, the near-invisible iron tokens. Here we have the skill tiles. These should be mixed up and placed face down. All the remaining workers, which come in red, yellow, and blue, are then placed inside the black bag. Then each player, without looking, draws 8 workers from the bag and secretly hides them behind their player screen. On the boats we placed earlier, you'll see the symbols for how many random workers need to be drawn from the bag and then placed in each boat. You'll also see the symbol representing random skill tiles, so draw these as well and place them on the boat. They're drawn face down, but when placed, you flip them face up. Now ensure the orientation of the season, turn order, and boat tiles is identical. Not only does this look nicer, but it is important for the gameplay because now each player will be assigned a specific side of the tiles to play on. For example, we could decide that this side of the tiles will be for me, and for my opponent, they will play to this side of the tiles. In a 3-player game, someone might get this side. In a 4-player, someone might take this side, and so on. It's probably easiest to pick sides that are closest to where you're sitting at the table. And that's how you set up the game. Keyflower is played over 4 seasons, and in each season, players take turns placing workers either on a tile in order to gain the benefit listed on it, or on their side of the tile to bid for ownership of it. If you win the bid for a tile, then at the end of the season, you get to add it to your personal village, and tiles within your own village can later be upgraded. This will increase the benefit when you use that tile, but also will usually give you additional victory points at the end of the game. After 4 seasons, whoever has the most victory points is the winner. Now, before we dive right into the gameplay, I think it would be helpful if I showed you the layout of these seasonal village tiles. This symbol tells us which season the tile will enter the game, in this case, spring. The large box shows the benefit you gain when placing a worker on the tile. For example, this provides 2 stone resources. Any symbols within the arrow are the cost to upgrade the tile once it's in your village. For example, this would cost 1 pickaxe skill tile. The rest of the symbols just remind us of the new benefit you receive once this tile is in your village and upgraded. This says you'll receive a stone and gold resource when you place a worker there, and at the end of the game you'll receive 3 victory points. And if we flip it over, we see that this is exactly what the tile becomes. So this just reminds us of what the tile can become once it is upgraded without us having to flip the tile over to see for ourselves. The game begins with the player holding the start player marker, and they will choose to either use a tile, bid on a tile, or pass. And then you continue around the table in clockwise order with each player making their own choices. And around it will go until each player has passed in succession. And that's important because it means you could pass on one turn, and then when it comes back around to you again, continue playing. You're not out of the round until all players have passed one after the other. And that's what actually ends the season. But let's start by showing you how to use a tile. The simplest way to do this is to pick one of your workers from behind your screen and then place it on an empty tile. You then immediately receive the benefit shown there. And it doesn't matter which color worker you use when the tile is empty. For example, instead, I could have placed a red worker. I then immediately collect 1 gold resource, and I place that resource on my home tile. On a future turn, another player, including myself, could use the gold mine again, but will now need to place more workers than the previous player, and they must be the same color as previously played. So I'll place 2 more red workers to gain another gold resource. The gold mine can now be used a final time by a player who places 3 workers there, again gaining a single gold resource. I say it can be used a final time because you can never have more than 6 workers on a tile. In fact, if you want to block a player, you could start by placing 3 workers there. So if I had done that initially, I would receive 1 gold resource. Now, if another player wants to use the gold mine, they would have to place 4 red workers there. But that makes for a total of 7 workers on the tile, and we just said that's not allowed. And something to note about gold. It's the wild resource of the game, meaning it can be used where needed in place of wood, stone, or iron. A tile may also generate a random skill token when you place a worker there. These are drawn randomly and then placed behind your screen where you can see them. Or it may show a white worker with a question mark, and this just means you draw a random worker from the bag and then secretly add it behind your screen. You can also place workers to transport goods and upgrade tiles, but we'll talk about that a little later. Now let's talk about bidding. This is the action you take when you want to try to collect a seasonal tile from the center of the table and add it to your personal village, or when you want to secure your position in the turn order. To bid, simply take any number of similarly colored workers and then place them on your side of the tile that you'd like to make a bid for. Another player may later bid for that tile by placing at least 1 more worker than was previously bid on their side of the tile, but they must match the color that started the bidding. And unlike taking actions, there is no maximum number of workers that can be bid around the tile. You may spend a later turn to increase your bid using more similarly colored workers, so long as this creates or remains a winning bid. So you can see that being the first player to place a worker on or beside a tile will then set the required color of workers for that tile during this season. Also, if someone first uses a tile to gain its benefit, other players can still bid on this tile, but they must now use workers to bid with that match the color of the worker that was placed on the tile. The same goes for a tile where the bidding has started. I can still use it for its benefit, but I have to make sure to place a worker that matches the color of the workers being used to bid. So unless otherwise stated, a tile will always have the same colored workers on and or surrounding it. And this is why green workers can be so valuable, because no one starts the game with any. So if you get even just 1 and then bid for a tile with it, if no one else has green workers, they can't outbid you. Now, I mentioned that you often take actions by placing workers from behind your screen either on or beside a tile. But you can also use workers from tiles where you've been outbid. So let's say for a moment I had bid on this tile, but then my opponent outbid me. So now on a future turn, I can collect all of the workers from this losing bid and place them as part of a new bid, say over to this tile here, or I can even place it on another tile to get the benefit of that tile. There's also an option to use them as part of an exchange, but I'll explain that later. The most important rule is that workers from a bid must go towards one use. I couldn't split them up, using one to bid for this tile and using one for this action. Wherever they go, they must go together. However, I can add other workers from behind my screen that match that color within the same action that I'm relocating those lost bid workers. That said, you can't take workers you've already placed and put them back behind your screen. You can't place workers on them, but you may bid for the turn order tiles. These will help determine the order that players pick new workers for the next season, as well as who may become the next start player. So remember, once all of the players have passed, one after the other, then the current season ends. So now let's take a look at what happens with all of our placed workers and the tiles. Players take any of their workers still placed as part of unsuccessful bids and put them back behind their screens. I have one right here that didn't win the bid, so I'll get to keep this and use it again next season. Any village tiles not bid for, like this one here, are placed back in the game box, and any workers on them, including green ones, are put back into the bag. Starting with the first player and going in clockwise order, players collect the tiles they won bids for, placing the workers they used to bid back into the bag, but adding any workers on the tile behind their screen. You then keep the village tiles you collect in a stack near your village. So the other player won the bids on these two tiles. So the workers they used to bid will go back into the bag. They'll collect these two tiles here, and this worker they'll keep as well and put behind their screen. I won the bids on these three tiles. So the workers I bid with will also go into the bag, but I'll get to collect all four of these workers to add behind my screen. Keep the village tiles that you collect in a stack near your village for now. The player who won the bid for turn order tile 1 puts their workers that they bid there back into the bag and then takes their pick of any of the boats, collecting all the workers on it and the tiles, placing them behind their screen. I would like to have this skill tile, so I'm going to pick this boat, collecting all the workers and taking both of these tiles. If there was another turn order tile, the winner of that one would get to pick next. In a two-player game, there's only one turn order tile, so now the second player would get to choose the remaining boat, collecting all the workers there along with any skill tiles and adding them behind their screen. Whoever bid on the tile showing the purple start player token will then collect that purple worker as well. Here are the boats and turn order tiles the way it would look in a four-player game. We'll say the first player has been designated to this side, second here, third here, and fourth here. So the first player has had a successful bid on the first turn order tile. They would return their worker back to the bag and then get first pick of any of the boats. Let's say they chose this one. No one bid on the second turn order tile, so then we would move down to the third one. And here, player 4 had a successful bid. These workers go back to the bag, and now they would get the second pick. Even though they bid on turn order tile 3, this is still the next turn order tile that was successfully bid on. So player 4 chose this boat. They also immediately collect the start player token. And this means the next player who has not collected a boat yet, sitting clockwise from the new start player, would now get the next pick of the remaining boats. Let's say the second player then chose this boat, collecting these workers and skill tiles. Then the remaining player who has not yet chosen a boat would have to collect these workers and this skill tile. It is possible for a single player to successfully bid on two different turn order tiles, but they will still only get to pick one of the boats to collect workers and tiles from. If no one bids on the tile showing the start player token, then the start player remains the same for now. And after all players who have bid on turn order tiles have collected their boats, you then go clockwise from the old start player, and any players who have not yet picked boat tiles will then choose in that order. after which the start player marker will then be passed to the player on the left. Now all the players at once add the village tiles that they collected to their personal village. Just make sure that all of the sides match. For example, I couldn't put this road against this field. I would have to rotate the tile, like so. Once placed, tiles cannot be repositioned later in the game. Once all of the village tiles have been placed, it's time for a new season. Ensure your boat tiles are flipped with the correct season symbol showing. For example, in a 3-player game, this boat would be out, but it only shows the spring symbol here. Flipping it will reveal the summer side. At the start of the summer and autumn seasons, place new workers and skill tiles onto the boats. In winter, you leave the boats empty. At the start of summer, we put out 6 new summer village tiles from the pile that we have put aside during the setup. You do the same again at the start of autumn from the autumn village pile. If you're playing with more than 2 players, then put out as many tiles as you're told to from the chart that's shown in the rulebook. As always, when placing village tiles to the table for the first time, ensure the season symbol is face up. Now that said, in summer you'll sometimes get these boat tiles, and they're meant to be placed random side up. So what I'll sometimes do when I draw a boat tile is I'll put it under the table, flip it a few times, and then slap it back on the table, and whichever side is face up, that's the one you stick with. Summer boat tiles are special because no one can place workers on them and they can't be upgraded or flipped over. Instead, they provide a special ongoing ability specifically to the player who has them in their village. As before, any undealt village tiles of that season are then returned to the box. Now, winter is treated a little differently. Instead of drawing tiles from a stack and placing them on the table, players will look at the 3 winter tiles that they received during the setup and then secretly choose 1 or more of them. You have to choose at least 1. The chosen tiles you put in a closed hand, and then all players reveal them at once. Well, you don't flip them over, but they all go onto the table into one single stack. This stack is then shuffled up. And then all of these tiles are revealed onto the table, and these are the tiles you'll be able to bid on during the winter season. You actually can't take actions on them. Instead, these will provide additional victory point bonuses if you have them in your village. Any winter tiles that were not chosen are just returned to the box. Otherwise, all seasons play out similar to spring. Again, placing workers on tiles or to bid on tiles. But one thing I didn't mention is that you can place workers on tiles that are within your village. Now, at the start of the game, you only have 1, your home tile. So I didn't talk about it then, but now that our village is expanding, let's talk about how you place workers on your own village tiles. Here's my nice little village, and if I place a worker on one of my tiles that creates resources, I then place that resource on the same tile. The workshop lets me create either an iron, wood, or stone resource. I'll take wood. You can even place your workers on another player's village tiles. On a future turn, I might take an action with my opponent's quarryman tile. This generates 2 stone, but when you generate resources on an opponent's tile, you place them on your home tile. If you have a village tile that creates skill tokens, these are always collected and placed behind your player's screen. Remember to follow all the same rules for how workers are placed on tiles, even within your own village or an opponent's. For example, if my opponent now wanted to use the quarryman, he or she would have to place 2 yellow workers there to take an action. The catch is that when you use an opponent's tile, then at the end of the season, they will collect all the workers that were put on that tile and place it behind their screen. So player 2 will get back these 2 workers along with the 1 worker that I placed there. The other action you may consider doing is transporting resources and upgrading tiles. If a tile can be upgraded, its cost will be shown here within this arrow. If the cost is resources, like this one showing 1 wood and 1 stone, then those resources must be located on the tile itself to perform the upgrade. So to do this, place a worker on a tile with a transportation and upgrade symbol. Each player starts with one of those on their home tile. The number here shows you the distance in tiles you may move any resource along your connected roads. So I could move this resource to this tile. However, if I had a resource here, I would not be able to move it to this tile because they are not directly connected by any roads. The number of house symbols you see here are how many upgrades you may conduct with this one action. In this case, just a single upgrade. And since I now have a wood and stone resource on this tile, I can upgrade. And I just want to remind you again, gold can act as any resource. So actually, before I moved the wood here, I had enough resources already because I could have used gold in place of wood. But I decided I wanted to save the gold. You now have to spend the resources you are using. This simply means returning them to the supply. You may then flip the upgraded tile over. This will show you the new upgraded abilities of the tile, as well as the victory points you will earn at the end of the game for having this tile in your village. On a future turn, by placing 2 blue workers here, I could take this action again. But now my transportation strength is 2. This means I could move a single resource 2 spaces, or 2 different resources 1 space. So maybe I'll move these 2 stone down to the workshop. The requirements to upgrade this show 2 white resources. That means I can use any 2 resources I want for this upgrade. But this time I'm actually going to upgrade my keystone quarry. And it shows that I need to have a pickaxe. This you just reveal from behind your screen and then mix back into the supply face down. And now I get to upgrade this tile, and as you can see, it earns me another 3 victory points at the end of the game. And just to be clear, if you take an action with a tile showing transportation and upgrade, you don't actually have to transport any resources if you don't want to. If you already satisfy the conditions required, you can just skip ahead and upgrade the tile. And don't forget, you can use the transportation and upgrade abilities located in other players' tiles by placing one of your workers there. The stables are fantastic. You get 4 movement points and you can upgrade 2 different tiles. So you can see that you may want to place the tiles in your village that generate resources near the tiles that need them to upgrade, just to save you some of those transportation steps. Now, as I mentioned, there's a few differences about winter, and one of them is that no new workers or skill tiles will arrive in that season. Players will still pick boats as they did in the other seasons, and again, priority is given to those who bid on the turn order tiles. But every player will still have an opportunity to collect one. And that's the big difference. Now, when you pick a boat, you take it, and you'll be able to add it to your village. And these boat tiles will generate additional victory points for you at the end of the game. For example, the Keyflower will give you 1 victory point for every point of transportation that you have in your village. I like the sound of that, so I'm going to take that one. I also take the turn order tile that I successfully bid on because I can add this to my village as well. And this will give me 1 victory point for every other tile in my village that is adjacent to this tile. Of course, when I place this tile in my village, I will have to do so, making sure that anything adjacent to it is correctly positioned. As in the other seasons, you can bid on more than 1 turn order tile, but you will only be able to collect 1 boat tile. That said, you can collect every turn order tile that you successfully bid on to be able to add to your village. So once all of the players have added any winter tiles they collected to their village, the game is over and it's time to move on to final scoring. One thing to mention before we get into the scoring is that when you place a boat tile into your village, you don't have to match the water side of the boat to a water side within your village. Instead, you could match the field sides like so. But remember, once you have placed a tile into your village, you can't change its positioning later, even if it would be more beneficial. So for scoring, first, resources placed on the barn, blacksmith, stone yard, or timber yard tiles can be kept where they are. I actually have a blacksmith tile here with 2 iron resources on them. And you can see this tile says that I will get 2 victory points for each iron resource I have. So these are great. But this iron resource won't add to that score because it's not located on the blacksmith tile. And don't forget, gold can be counted as any other resource. So if I had a gold resource here, it could be worth 2 victory points. Players are now free to allocate all other resources and skill tiles they have on other tiles or behind their screen to any other tiles that aren't the barn, blacksmith, stone yard, or timber yard in order to give you victory points for those items. And no transportation is required for this. So for example, I have the jeweler here, and that will give me 2 victory points for every gold resource token I have. So I could allocate these 2 gold to this tile. Also, any leftover gold that you have not chosen to score as part of another tile will provide you with 1 point each. And so this is the really important thing to remember. Each item can only be scored once. So this gold resource here, which is giving me 2 victory points from the blacksmith tile, cannot also give me 2 points from the jeweler tile or the additional 1 point that you get for any unused piece of gold. Also, in the scoring round, the player who has the start player marker can use it to act as any one resource, skill tile, or worker of any color. And that may help them get some extra points. For example, I would like to use it as a gold resource, placing it there to give myself an additional 2 points. This turn order tile that I collected is going to give me an additional 2 points, 1 for each tile that it is adjacent to. The Keyflower Winter Effect gives me 1 victory point for every point of transportation I have. I currently have 4 plus 2, which is 6 for 6 more points. My home was upgraded, giving me 5 points, and the Keystone Quarry was upgraded, giving me 3 points. Adding up all of those values gives me my final score. The player with the most points is then declared the winner. The rules do say, if there is a tie, the tied players should play a second game to determine the winner. Now, there are a couple of other rules I want to go over. For example, the supply is limited. In other words, if you were meant to be able to collect a gold resource, but all of them have been used up, then you're not able to take one. Same goes for workers. If you try to draw one from the bag and there aren't any, you don't get a worker. The rules do say you can feel the bag maybe before placing a bid to determine approximately how many workers are in there, because that might influence how many workers you're willing to bid for a particular tile. Green workers are also a limited supply. If you're owed one and there aren't any left, you can't go rummaging through the bag to try to find one. Nice try, though. And if you're trying to place workers onto the boats and you run out, what you should be doing is placing them one at a time, 1 to each boat, until you run out. Now, one thing I can't do is go over each of the tiles and tell you how they all work. Thankfully, most of the symbols, just from what I've told you, should be pretty clear to you. But in case you have any questions at all, at the back of the rulebook there's a guide for each tile explaining exactly what they do in case you do have any questions. That said, there is one tile I would like to show you to provide an example of something I mentioned earlier, using your outbid workers as part of an exchange. This is the peddler tile, and it allows you to exchange a yellow worker to collect a green one. I take this action by placing a worker on the tile, and then I remove a yellow worker from behind my screen and add it back to the bag, and then collect a green worker from the supply and add it behind my screen. So this is one of the ways you can get those valuable green workers. But here's another way I could complete that exchange. Let's say I take the action again. This time, instead of removing a yellow worker from behind my screen, I could choose workers that are on a tile where I've been outbid. But remember, you cannot split up those workers, so I'll have to exchange both of them, returning them to the bag, but still I only collect 1 green worker. Now remember, when playing the game, each season you're only going to be introduced to a few new tiles at a time, so I think it's a great idea when you're first learning to just make sure everyone at the table understands what those few tiles do. In no time at all, you'll have them all mastered. Well, that's everything you need to know to play Keyflower. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to ask them in the comments below. I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. But until the next episode, thanks for watching.